So it does seem like, we're going to be getting more Finn Balor. We've been teased a Finn Balor push right in 2026 by Finn himself, and it seems like WWE is also kind of teasing this as well. We've had Finn essentially in Belfast have an amazing match with CM Punk, where he essentially was the face going into to potentially win the world title off the big boss of Punk, and kind of off the heels and momentum of that, we kind of have this current situation in which Finn is now challenging again for the title at Elimination Chamber. I kind of want to kind of look at this here, because in the promo that happened on Raw, kind of with Balor and Punk, and Balor kind of goading Punk into another match, we had Finn kind of address the demon and address the faults that kind of happened, especially that Roman Reigns match that he had, where essentially he was cheated out of the title with one of the worst probably booking decisions we've seen. A faulty rope, that was planted by one of the Bloodline members that screws over the demon, and Reigns retained. It was one of the matches kind of during that Bloodline era where I think people started to a little bit get tired of the match formula that was kind of happening within Bloodline matches, and that was kind of the first inkling of that kind of ridiculous run-in, New Samoan, etc. type of finish that was happening to kind of protect Roman's longevity, right? And in addressing that, he was talking about how the demon character necessarily wasn't meant to be a crutch, and he's gone on to kind of talk about this on like Cody's podcast, for example, where there was a problem with the demon where especially when he brought it up to main roster, it felt like the demon was better than Finn, that the demon was the stronger character, when in reality the demon wasn't supposed to be some alter necessarily reality or personality, but just Finn himself, just putting on an exuberant kind of makeup essentially, and getting into battle pain essentially. Anytime Balor came in demon form, it was essentially, he was told, even you can kind of tell, he was told to kind of have a different aura about him compared to regular Finn, and then that kind of created a disconnect for the longest amount of time on the main roster, where we had this smiley guy Finn, who seemed to kind of lose that edge that he kind of had at NXT, and kind of once he got that Prince gimmick and was able to turn heel and have a little bit of more of a heel run on the main roster as well with the Judgment Day, I think we kind of now see a proper Finn in terms of who he is as a character, the real rock and roller, from Bullet Club essentially, who kind of I think now has taken a back seat for JD and many in the Judgment Day to help them up. The thing is though with that is that when Finn did come onto the main roster, he had the trajectory of top guy. They gave him the belt immediately, and it was really just the timing and unfortunate reality of the injury that happened to him that really sidelined what most likely would have been a multiple world title reign career, and I think especially addressing that now with kind of Punk and within the Judgment Day, or in the confines of the Judgment Day, we have a really interesting opportunity here to tell an amazing story between Finn, JD, and Dom of the Judgment Day. I think kind of one of resentment, maybe one of jealousy, Finn being someone who did burst on the scene but then hurt himself and wasn't able to really tap into that potential in terms of, I guess, like storyline success, right? Kayfabe success. And I think that should be more brought upon, and should be an essential part of his character kind of moving forward. There should be a chip on his shoulder. In the promo that he gave to Punk and gave to the audience, you do kind of see that chip on his shoulder, and it does elicit even response from the audience that has grown tired and complacent over Finn for so many years, since he's been kind of, dilly-dallying in mid-card feuds and basically hovering around the tag team titles ever since he joined the Judgment Day. I mean, obviously we can even go back to the point where him and Edge fought. Edge really did not need that win at all. He was Edge, Edge, the purpose of the Judgment Day was to get over the people that were in it, mainly Damian Priest, Rhea Ripley, and Finn at the time, right? And it just boggled my mind at the time that the Demon lost to Edge at that Mania. And that could be more, a personal thing for or Edge maybe not wanting to put him over, but I'm not going to say that. I would assume more this was all a mutually agreed Edge should put him over. I just didn't agree with that opinion. I think Finn is one of the mainstays of WWE, and he has been since he's arrived on the main roster or even in NXT back in 2014. And I did feel like, especially when he was coming up in NXT, he had a Jeff Hardy like presence and aura that kids specifically were gravitating towards him. That was seen in his initial push, and I think that's why Vince and co did have him, win at SummerSlam 2016, right? But to fast forward to where we are now and how the Demon has been handled, it's interesting to think about. Will the Demon ever really come back? The whole concept of it, just like Finn said, kind of it being a stronger version of him, is not what he necessarily wanted. So anytime we do kind of see, teases of this happening, or for example when he came out in Belfast to the face version of his music, and everyone was like, I mean, especially being in Ireland, this was his hometown, and the people were waiting for him and paying to see him, right? So obviously there's you got to take that into a factor, but people were extremely excited and ready to mime with him immediately again. And the last time he'd pulled that entrance with the arms was like years ago. This is something that the crowd could have easily just forgot. But it's obvious to many who watch, right, that Finn is more than what he currently is. And to get back to how that could play into a Judgment Day kind of storyline, while Finn might not end up with this world title, because let's be honest, CM Punk and Roman Reigns is that money match, we can kind of salvage that with, which I've said in my WrestleMania 42 predictions video, some sort of match between Dominic and Finn. Obviously JD is injured, but back when JD was healthy, him and Finn were going for those tag titles, and Finn has that mentor relationship with JD. That's another thing that could be kind of expanded upon, where Dom could be exploiting that relationship between JD and Finn to further himself, and then in catching on that, Finn can then retaliate, and then we have kind of a power struggle between the two alphas of the Judgment Day, similar to when we kind of had the breakaway of Rhea Ripley and Damian Priest. I think a similar thing needs to happen. Not necessarily that people might be broken away, but I do think there needs to be a hierarchy kind of set within the Judgment Day. And I do think that if there was a kind of a healthy feud between Dom and Finn, in terms of, hey, young boy, like, we let you into this den, you know what I mean? But for you to act and kind of mosey along around here as if you own the place, and as if we're all second fiddle to what we're all instruments of your destruction. It's not how it is. The Judgment Day does not have a leader. So I do think in terms of Finn rebuilding his character and coming back, you know what I mean? Before we ever do bring back the Demon, I do think that Prince Devitt, the Prince kind of moniker should return. I think in that respect, that's kind of the real Finn, the real rock and roller, the man who had a chip on his shoulder, in terms of wanting to prove he was the best, and also was kind of a little bit of a skeeve, a little bit of an opportunist in a way. You saw that in NXT. He was extremely ruthless, with betraying kind of, what was it, DIY at the time, and aligning with the Undisputed Era to further his own goals, and that was extremely effective. I think in this era, especially with the big names of a Punk and Roman, I feel like people like Finn would be the perfect antithesis, heel to both those men, and unfortunately, instead of him getting a real shot, he's had a couple pot shots here and there at the world title, like I think Seth earlier in Seth's first world heavyweight title reign. There should be a legitimate story to these failed world title attempts and the essence of what Finn feels he is, the whole idea of fighting with the Demon. What is the Demon? They can do vignettes essentially where they would tease maybe him confronting his past, his demons necessarily, and then you can have that as a tease and a build up when, you know, Elimination Chamber happens essentially and the Demon comes back. The thing is though, obviously in terms of what we're speaking of right now, there's most likely no way in hell CM Punk is going to lose his title right now, especially when we have the possibility of this Ebros main event happening. What could possibly happen, I know a lot of people have been talking about a run back of Demon Balor versus Roman Reigns, but we need that to be built. That's not going to be something that sells or moves tickets at WrestleMania 42 compared to a Punk and Roman. Punk and Roman, there's a lot more context right now in terms of recency, just what they've been doing recently. I mean, obviously the team up at War Games and the triple threat that happened last year, essentially over the Paul Heyman love triangle that happened, right? I think obviously the move is to have Roman and Punk, right, in terms of that marquee match, you know, but I do think there's an awesome story that can be told here for Finn, maybe going into post-Mania, you know, where he's being overlooked despite being that blue chip prospect that initially did win it all back in 2016. I mean, I know that they did kind of talk about this in the mini feud that he had with Seth, where they had a program where they, you know, Seth defended the title a couple times against Finn, but with the constant Judgment Day run-ins, you know, Finn was never able to properly, right, like, you know, fight for that title. It is kind of interesting where we are with it. I do think that, you know, while Demon Balor is extremely fun and it was a cool thing, I think it was a lot of wasted potential, essentially, especially when you took the NXT version of that, you know, this NXT champion, I think at the time one of the longest running NXT champions, and you kind of demystified this character, you know, as essentially just an alter ego and not an experience. I think the Demon entrance and everything obviously was big money, and that's something that they saw, right? But it's all about how you can incorporate that into your show. The same way that they handled the Wyatt Six, I believe they should have handled the Demon. This presence that this Undertaker-like presence that, you know, maybe there is like a lot of smoke and mirrors that goes on to make it interesting. You know, I don't think, you know, oh, I've painted myself, I'm more aggressive, I'm essentially now a 90 overall because of that, is really, that doesn't benefit really anyone's character. And that was the point of Finn's promo on Monday, was that, you know, that the paint and the you know, the character of Balor isn't the power of the Demon. It's always been in him. I do kind of hope that we do get more of a dive into this, you know, and I kind of hope that there's, you know, while I do kind of hope for a Dom Finn IC title kind of, you know, match or feud kind of at Mania to have these two men kind of confront each other for these things, we most likely won't get something like that. I think Finn is, you know, at this point he's a veteran, and I think he kind of does deserve another bone at some point, you know. And I do think that he's kind of been on the sidelines in terms of that success almost the majority of the career ever since he kind of came back from the injury. There was never a real push for him to be the focal point of a story or really any of that, you know. He was always the smiling Finn, you know, and then it wasn't until he went back to NXT under the Prince moniker and then had a really good heel run that they were able to kind of see value in him as at least a heel. Just in general, it got me thinking about, you know, if we would ever see the Demon again, I guess, essentially, and whether or not, you know, we'll see that Demon, I guess, at Elimination Chamber. I don't know if even we'll get the face music again, just because I think Belfast was like maybe a one and done. But just in general, I think Finn Balor and his kind of whole character arc is a result of just how many different things can happen in WWE, and the trajectory is never what it seems. And unfortunately, I think Finn is just a cautious tale of that in terms of how timing can kind of change everything, right? And I do kind of hope that moving forward, especially with these feuds and kind of with Balor in general, that we get more personable moments that allow the smarter fan to really reflect on these things and how they happen, especially with, you know, I think we're able to revisit all these things because of the championship match that did happen in Ireland a couple of weeks ago. So with the beauty of pro wrestling, we kind of had this mini feud where Punk does feel like kind of a final boss, and Finn is climbing this mountain to then be part of the top guys. For Finn specifically, that's still been a fight for him for such a long time. Especially on the Cody podcast, we kind of see how a lot of what Finn has done, as Fergal, has really influenced and kind of been copied by the majority of top indie stars, for example, that went to Japan. And for all of that to funnel into the Bullet Club, the rise of ROH, and then eventually AEW, you can say that Finn Balor was really one of the catalysts for that type of thing. I do feel like he should get more of a credence and have more of a legacy within WWE, and I do think that does come with a new either title win or even a win over maybe Dom at WrestleMania for the IC title. He might not necessarily hold it for too long, but I think there needs to be some sort of success for Finn in terms of that, just because then really everything that we've seen kind of is going nowhere, and it makes him look extremely weak, and it will make the rest of the Judgment Day once again look extremely weak and look like a bunch of just goons who terrorize whoever the faces are. I feel like the Judgment Day is unique in that there are multiple facets of it that don't overshadow each other and just are different, and I kind of don't want that to disappear, but I also think we should take that and make a really good feud out of it, especially with a lot of the stuff we've been getting these past couple of weeks between Finn and Punk. I think that there's a big story there between Finn actually and the rest of Judgment Day in terms of where they all align in terms of goals and what they want to do. Let me know what you guys kind of think. Kind of a random video about kind of a specific feud in general between Balor and Punk. I don't think Punk and Balor, I don't think like they're going to take the belt off. I think kind of with the whole Drew McIntyre championship win, I don't think we're going to see really any major titles change until WrestleMania right now. That's a bold prediction by me. Maybe we'll see. But yeah, what do you guys think about Finn Balor maybe coming back as a demon? What do you guys think Finn should be doing kind of moving forward? I think after kind of moving on from CM Punk, there should be more of a focus on Finn in general as a top heel in the division, so that we don't lose the momentum that we just had of him contending for that title. But that's just my opinion. Let me know what you guys think. Take care.